Welcome to today's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Hey, have you ever been kind of befuddled why your competitors or chief rivals always find themselves quoted in the news? What's their secret? What can you do to make yourself as publicly aware as those who you are competing against? We're going to find all about that on this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which is brought to you by. Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Mendon Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa. What happened there? I froze for a second. Welcome to this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Today we're going to learn something that's very practical. Whether you're in business, whether you have a nonprofit, or any sort of organization that seeks publicity and can't get it. Here's some secrets. We're going to be talking about some secrets that really came about from years of experience as a reporter. So I get hundreds of emails every day that it's inundating my email box requesting that I write a story on this or that. And most of them, to be honest, go right into the trash bin. I just don't have time to look at all of them. But I do look at a couple every day. What's unique about those? Why do I look at those? Well, I'll go one step further. What do I look at instead? What I look at instead are my regular sources. My regular sources are the people who I talk to all the time. There are literally hundreds of those people too. And each week maybe I'll get dozens of responses to a query that I send out, and I'll pick and choose between those queries which sources I'll quote in the article. That's a lot easier way to get in the newspaper than making a pitch. And we've talked about pitches before when we talked about sending press releases. This episode is about how do you answer a reporter's query. So the reporter is actually going out and asking you a series of questions, and you will be able to respond to the reporter. It's not a cold call, so to speak, or a cold response. It's more warm because the reporter is anticipating or expecting you to respond. But even still, the reporter does not open every email, does not read every email. And even when they read every email, reporters don't necessarily use every source that they get. So what's the secret of that? Before we get into that, though, I want to talk about something called earned media. Now, earned media is different than paid media. Paid media is something that, well, it's an advertisement. It's what you pay for. Earned media is when you get quoted and you don't pay for it. So it's when a reporter quotes you in a story, which is the objective that we're trying to reach right now. Why is earned media so important? Well, there are 4 different types of authority. I'm going to get a little bit into some academic stuff here. 4 different types of authority. And the first one is this sort of, the referral authority, or the kind of authority that you have when you are, the king of something. It's the kind of authority that is normally called entitlement. It has to do with the position that you hold, the title that you hold, all those sorts of things that are critical to getting things done. I mean, you want to be able to see that, to experience it in a way that people will automatically follow what you're saying. If you're a general, say in the army, this is the kind of authority that you want. You don't want people questioning you what you're doing because lives matter. So this entitlement type of authority is very important. The problem is it doesn't have a lot of legs. I mean, once you get out of the army and a general comes up to you, you're not going to do what he says just because he says it. So that gets us into a different type of authority. And this kind of authority is actually called more of an expert authority. An expert authority is exactly what it sounds like. It's somebody who knows what they're doing. They have technical prowess, and they are able to convince you to do something that you want to do and get it done. What's the next type of authority? The next type of authority is called engagement authority. This is the kind of authority that deals with networking. It's who you know, where you know, how you know them, and your ability to kind of work those informal contacts to get commitments and do things like that. So you still have to work at it. I mean, you have to work at all these kinds of authorities, but once you enter a room, you have to work at it. So what kind of authority are we really shooting for when we want to get quoted in the newspaper? Well, that kind of authority is called earned authority. So this is the authority that gives you the credibility to step into the room and do something just based on what people know about you, what people recognize about you. It's really a source of true power. Now, let's look at an example of earned authority. And earned authority, I like to say earned authority is really predicated on the three famous words of real estate: location, location, location. Now, let's use the great Yankee captains as an example of what earned authority is. Which one of these Yankee captains would motivate you the most? How about Lou Gehrig? Of course he would. What about Derek Jeter? Yes, probably. Very good. And how about Thurman Munson? Well, you don't know about Thurman Munson. Maybe a lot of people don't know about Thurman Munson. He was the captain of the Yankees for just a couple of years in the 70s before he unfortunately died in a plane crash just as his career was really starting to take off. So it's the location in your mind. It's the location really where you are, all about you, that kind of builds up this earned authority. You could see all three of these players have the sort of title. They're all captains. They have the expertise, and they probably were good at engagement, which is why they were captains. By the way, Babe Ruth was captain of the Yankees before Lou Gehrig for just about a year, and then he got mad at a fan and charged into the stands to beat him up, and no more captainship for Babe Ruth. Anyway, so you have those sort of authorities, but how do they earn it? Well, how do they earn it? Well, they certainly earned it with their teammates, and there they earned it primarily in the locker room. So the locker room is a key place to earn your authority with the players. So if you're a team captain, that's where you want to go. You're not a team captain right now. You may be a team captain within your business, and so your business office is your locker room, and you can earn authority there, and that's great. But you really want to earn authority with your customers, with the broader market out there. So what's the equivalent of the locker room for that sort of authority? It's one thing to show leadership in a locker room. That's where it starts. But if this is all we need to know, how do we explain Thurman Munson? I mean, he's an authority within the locker room, certainly, but outside of that, how many people know him? It's quite another thing to have this authority, this leadership, this earned authority be recognized outside of the locker room. So this provides your completion for your quest for earned authority, going outside of the locker room. And it's an example of what behavioral psychologists call social proof. You want to have some sort of evidence, some sort of social proof that you actually are this authority that you'd like to be. So let's look at one example of a captain, another sports captain, and how maybe his world changed based on his authority. He was certainly an authority within the locker room. That's how he got to be the captain. And who I'm talking about Mike Eruzione, who scored the winning goal in the 1980 Winter Olympics for what is now called Miracle on Ice. It became a famous movie. Everybody looked at it. Great. It was made out. Michael's famous for calling it. Before the Miracle on Ice, Mike Eruzione was well known primarily within New England, where he grew up, and within the hockey world. But after Miracle on Ice, he's now a recognized leader of and an inspirational person, by the way, throughout the world, or certainly throughout America. So he had this sort of earned authority. He was there on ice. He showed what he could do. So think of the same way when you talk to reporters, you're going to be showing what you do to the rest of the world. So what are the three rules, the 1, 2, 3, ABC, do, re, mi to-do list if you want to attain this level of earned authority? Well, the first thing you have to do is earn your authority within your own business, within your own industry. So you start by that's the locker room. That's working within the locker room. Then you have to work on earning your authority outside of the locker room, outside of your office, outside of your business. That's where getting in the paper, getting on media, that helps you earn your authority doing it that way. Then finally, and it's not just about earning this authority. There's a reason why you are earning this authority, and that's what you've really got to focus on. Why are you earning this authority? You're doing this to capitalize on it in some way. You want to be able to sell more products. You want to be able to rise up in your firm. You want to be able to, get elected to office, become the president of your nonprofit group, whatever it is. There are things that you want to do to capitalize on this earned authority. But it really starts with point number 1, becoming an authority within your business. But it really starts taking off at step 2, where you begin to earn your authority outside of your business. And that's kind of what we want to get into next when we talk about the 10 steps or the 10 rules that you've got to follow when you talk to reporters. These are things that reporters will respond to after they call you up, after they talk to you, after they ask you a series of questions. This is what you're going to have to do to respond in order to get the reporter to say, hey, I like that response. I like that person. I'll use that person in this story, and I may want to go back to him for future stories. That's your goal in this step 2 here, I guess it is, to earn your authority outside of your industry. And we'll talk more about this when we come back here on the State of Greater Western New York Report.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York Reporting, and I'm Chris Carosa, your host. And it's going to be a little bit more difficult for me to get to the questions that you might be asking, but please put them in the chat if you do have a question, and I'll do my best to get to them. We've got a pretty quick, tight program, and I'm the only one here today, and that's going to try to be a little bit of a challenge as we go forward and give you very quickly now the 10 rules or the 10 guidelines you need to follow when a reporter asks you a question. So let's start off with number one. Number one, remember, they are asking you a question. So what are you going to do when they ask you the question? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to answer the question, obviously, but you're going to answer the question in a way that does repeat the question. So let's say there's a series of questions. You want to be able to answer those questions in the same order that the reporter asked the questions. So what that means is you're going to be able to answer the questions in a way that identifies the question as well as the number of that question when you're answering it. So it's very clear to the reporter what your response is. I can't tell you how many times I get questions that people just answer. They don't tell me what question they're answering. They'll just answer the question. Or if I ask a series of questions, they'll give me a paragraph, and within that paragraph, there may or may not be answers to the specific questions that I asked. Well, I don't know how to use that quote because I'm using these questions. I'm asking these questions in a specific order, in a specific sequence, so that it'll help me construct the story that I'm writing. If you don't answer the questions specifically, put your answer after each question, and jumble all your answers together, I don't know which question you're really answering. It's less likely I'm going to use your answers as a quote, which actually gets us into our next problem. And that's what a lot of people do. They don't just answer a question, they start to monologue. They answer a long, long question, or they provide a long, long answer, words upon words upon words. If you want to have a reporter use a specific soundbite, just offer that soundbite. Don't give me all the exposition around it. If you offer more, this is what you risk. The reporter's going to ignore your entire answer because it's too long, or the reporter is just going to skim your response and miss your key points, which is what it's all about. Or, and this is most frustrating for sources, the reporter uses a less important quote than what you wanted. Here's what some public relations people think or say, and what other people do. They say, look, I'm going to give the reporter everything because anything that they use is better than nothing. Okay, if that's your objective, then that's fine. But for a lot of people who are trying to gain authority, you want to get authority in a very specific way. So let's say that, you're a horse groomer and you want people to know that you're really good at grooming horses. And the reporter asks a question about grooming horses. And you have this great idea that no one else uses on how to groom horses, and you put it in there. But in the midst of talking about that idea, you talk about how brushes are made that you use to comb horses. And you get into this detail, and it's interesting, it's fascinating, it's arcane. No one else says it. So the reporter uses that quote. So you're not an expert on grooming horses now. You're becoming an expert on the tools that horse groomers use. So that's the risk that you take when you start answering much more words than what you need to do. Point number 3, don't have two people from the same firm answer the question. This happens more frequently than you can imagine. I'll ask a query out, and the public relations person from the company or the private firm that they use comes back with quotes from 2 individuals. Well, the worst thing that happens is they'll say, hey, person A and person B offer the following answers. And then they give all the answers, but they don't say which person says what. Did they both say this? Did one person say some things and another person say another thing? I don't know. They didn't tell me. But even if they tell me, it gets into the problem. As a reporter, I don't want to quote people from the same firm. That doesn't represent the diversity of sources that reporters need, especially if the firm may have an agenda with regard to the subject that we're writing about. I mean, it's okay to use somebody with an agenda. You just need to have a counterpoint from somebody in another location or another firm that doesn't necessarily share that agenda. So it's okay. But if you have the same people providing quotes to the same questions, then you're leaving it to the reporter to decide who to use. The more powerful answers might be from the lesser known person or the person with a lower title. That might not be who you want to have quoted. On the other hand, the reporters often will just say, oh, look, I'll just use the quote from the person who has the highest title because that gives more prestige to the article. But the quote might be a lame quote. So you've got to be careful. It's really best just to have one person from a firm answer the reporter's questions. So the other thing that you need to realize, and I mentioned this as far as titles in these two different people, a lot of people will answer questions and then they don't give any information about themselves, or they give too much. So there's a lot of people who have multiple titles, including myself, by the way. So use the title that's most relevant for that article. If you are a producer of a TV show and you're also the inventor of a widget, and the question is about, hey, what do TV producers do? You know, don't say I'm the producer of a TV show and I'm an inventor of a widget. And oh, by the way, I won the Nobel Prize for this widget invention. So the article's about a producer for TV shows. You are a producer for TV shows. But you told the reporter you won a Nobel Prize for inventing these widgets. So when you're quoted in that article, you're not going to be quoted as TV producer, usually. You're going to be quoted first as Nobel Prize widget inventor, person X, parenthetically, who also is a producer. That might be how the reporter does it. So only use the title that you want to have appear in the article. Don't use all the other titles. Along with this is don't rely on automatic email signatures. For the most part, these things come in, they're not text, they're an image. And images often don't get processed correctly in readers' emails. You cannot rely on the image being processed correctly. So the best way to do this is to include all your vital information in the text at the end of the report. So that includes your name, your title, only one of them, your firm, and this is most important, your full address. Why is your full address important? Well, I write national stories, so I want to get sources from across the United States. I don't want to just get sources, say, from the Northeast or from the Southwest. I don't want them just to be from one region of the country. I want them to be from all over. So having your full address tells me where you're from, number one. Number two, it also tells me you're a real person. So I could look you up and find out more things about you if I have any questions about the nature of your answers. If you're giving me a really unique answer, one that no one else has given, well, my first brush is to say, okay, is this person real? Does this person really have the credibility to give me this answer? So I'll have to look you up and see what your background is and see if I'm taking a risk quoting somebody who's given an answer that no one has ever given before. Now, I'm taking a risk in the sense where you might not really have the authority to say what you're saying. But if what you're saying is critical, and I'm one of the first reporters who reports it, I want to put that in my article. I don't want to be scooped by another reporter. So give me everything you can to tell me you're a real person and you have the credibility. That goes a long way to getting quoted. Now, notice what I'm saying. You're trying to build credibility by being quoted in a reporter's article, yet the reporter is trying to verify your credibility. It sounds like a catch-22, but in fact, this is why earned media, not advertising, but earned media getting quoted gives you more credibility, because reporters vet you in a way that advertisements don't. So that's why it's critical that you be able to get quoted in articles so that you can build your own credibility. Now, what's the other thing that you shouldn't do? Don't send an attachment. This is a classic problem with emails, just in general. I mean, I'll tell you, a lot of people will send me Word files. because they write their answers in Word files. That's fine. You can write your answers in Word files, but copy the text and paste it right to the email. So I don't have time to figure out if I should open this attachment, because a lot of attachments I don't open. So I really want to read the text. If I get a ton of responses, then I don't need to open up your attachment. You might have the greatest answer in the world, and I'm going to miss it because I didn't want to open up your attachment, whereas everybody else put it in the body of the email. So I don't have to open it up. It's very quick, very efficient, and very safe for me to look at the answers that way. Number 8, when you use an email, use a corporate email. Don't use a Gmail, Yahoo, Earthlink, whatever there is out there, AOL. These don't really appear to be professional. If you're trying to build credibility within organizational type credibility within your business, within your nonprofit, whoever you're representing, you want to kind of get that brand out there. You want the reporter to know, hey, I'm not Chris Carosa at gmail.com. I'm Chris Carosa at xyzcompany.com, because XYZ Company is who I want to promote, who the brand image that I want to project. So that's important. You use that real corporate email. The other problem with these free emails is that more and more sophisticated servers are starting to block them from coming in. Works both ways, by the way. So they are not only being blocked, say, from your server, from the reporter server, I should say, but if the reporter responds back to you, Gmail may put them in the promotions folder, the spam folder, because it doesn't recognize where this email is coming from. So try to use your corporate emails whenever you're responding to a reporter. It just really helps you out. It helps the reporter out, and you don't want the reporter to think you're a spammer. Spammers use Gmails and everything like that. Number 9, don't quote somebody else. This may sound obvious, but this goes kind of to where monologue comes in. A lot of people want to sound cool. They want to sound like they know things. So they'll quote a famous person in their story, and then they'll leave it at that. That's their answer. Well, as a reporter, I could look it up the quote myself. I don't need you to tell me. If I wanted to quote a famous person, I will have already done it when I draft out the article. I'll know who I want to quote. I want to know your quote. You may say the same thing as the famous person, but I'm interested to know your perspective on it. Why you say the same thing? Why what this famous person said a century ago or more, why it still applies today. You're going to give me the reason why it applies today, not by quoting the famous person, but by telling me the answer to the question that I asked you. So finally, number 10, and this is where things get really tricky. What happens if the reporter doesn't ask you a question, but asks you for a pitch instead? So it's more like, hey, I'm thinking of writing a story about frogs making noise in the pond. Tell me something about that. And that's it. That's it. That's the question. So in a sense, what they're asking is, pitch me on your idea about frogs in a pond, and I'll decide whether or not I want to write it. That's a whole different kettle of fish. And really, you should go back to the episode, I think, a couple of months ago, where I talked about what to put in a press release. Because, in effect, you're writing a story. To answer this kind of question, you're writing a story, and you need to construct it the same way that you would construct a press release. Have all those elements in it. So I think that's a pretty good, very fast overview of the 10 important critical guidelines that you have to follow when you're talking to reporters. And I don't have time for any questions for this particular episode, although I do, really quickly, where can I find okay, so somebody wants to know where they can find the previous episode. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, it's going to be a little harder. You could go backwards and find that. But the easiest way is just to go to stateofgreaterwesternnewyork.com, and you can look at it down there, and it'll give you an archive of past episodes. This would be under the business category. By the way, if you go to this site, and you're not already a subscriber to this channel, just hit there. You'll be put on a mailing list so that you could be placed and invited to these weekly shows. Just attend the ones that you're most interested in. You can ask questions and have fun at the same time. It's during lunch every Thursday at noon, at least if you're on the Eastern Coast, so Eastern time zone. So it's something to sit back, relax, and enjoy. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching and just say we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye for now.